So in the Easy Rail Fence Quilt, you can make your blocks by cutting your pieces and sewing them together. But if you have to make a lot of identical blocks, there is another method that is even more efficient way of making them. And that's what I'm showing you today. Welcome to Eva Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, pojagi, and embroidery. So welcome to the Make Your First Quilt series. If you're making your first quilt, I'm really excited for you. And if this is your first video and you're wondering what I'm talking about, you can go back and watch the rest of the videos. I'm taking you step by step through the whole process of making your very first quilt. And the quilt that we're making is a simple rail fence quilt. So I'm giving you all the information in the videos, but if you want something printable to go along with it, I do have an accompanying pattern and you can look at the link below to see how to get that. But this is the basic block that we're making. So a block of the quilt is a little piece, we make a whole bunch of them and then we sew them together. And in the last video, I showed you how to make this block by cutting these 3 rectangles and then sewing them together. But in this quilt, we're making a lot of identical blocks. And so there is another more efficient way of making that, and this is called strip piecing. So that's what I'm going to show you in today's video. And for strip piecing, instead of sewing together the little fabrics, we're going to take our long strips that we have and we're going to sew the whole strip together. So I'm going to do these in the same layout that I have. So I'm going to have my gray on the inside and pink and blue on the outside. And so I'm going to start with 2 of them. So I have my gray and my blue, and I'm going to put those right sides together. And then at the sewing machine, I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch away along the whole piece. And so it's done just the same way, it's just longer. Now, if you find it helpful to put a couple pins in your piece, then go ahead and put a couple pins or a couple little clips just to hold it together as you're sewing. Once you have a lot of experience, you probably won't need the pins anymore, but there's nothing wrong with using pins if that helps you to keep everything together securely. So I'm going to sew these together and then show you what it looks like and how we press that. So at the ironing board, we're going to press this in the same way, but of course this seam is much longer. So we have to do it in little sections. So I'm going to start with just putting the iron on the stitches just to kind of set them into the fabric and smooth it out before we press. And now I'm going to just start at this end. It doesn't matter which end you start at. And I'm just pressing my iron up. And the reason why we press it this way is if we press from this side, then sometimes you get a little kind of pleat in here. And pressing from this side helps that to be open and smooth. So I'm just going to continue working along the piece. And if you have a wide ironing board, then you can move yourself and the iron instead of moving the fabric. I just have this small piece, and for the sake of the camera, I am moving the fabric. So I'll keep pressing this down and then just give it a final press to make sure everything is nice and smooth and flat. So here we have this long piece. Now I'm going to add the pink fabric to the other side just the same way. So when the pink piece is added, now I have this long strip with 3 fabrics, and this is called a strip set. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the blocks. So before we cut the pieces and then sew them together to make the blocks, in this case, we sew the pieces together first, and then we're going to cut them to make the blocks. So for doing that, we need to go back to our cutting mat. So here we are at the cutting mat, and we're going to lay this out. But as you might have guessed, if we want to cut our blocks, we're going to want to cut a piece that's 9.5 inches. And our ruler is only 6 inches wide. And if I turn it this way, now I can get 9.5 inches this way, but I still don't have 9.5 inches that way. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can cut this. The first way involves 2 rulers. If you do have 2 rulers, you can do it this way. So in that way, I would put 1 ruler and line up this ruler with the pieces, and I like to line it up with these seam lines in the middle, because sometimes your seams aren't perfectly straight, but this will help keep the block pretty straight. And then I know that this is 6, then I need to add 3.5, so then I can just slide this down. So now I have, that is the 3.5 inch line, and these are butted right up against each other. Everything looks straight, so now I can cut it. And because this is the first cut, again, this edge isn't totally straight, so just like on the strips, now I'm gonna have to turn it around. So I have my 6 inches, and there's my 3.5 inches here, and have these butted up against each other. And sometimes I'll have to wiggle this around if it's not totally straight. And I'll trim that. So there is my 9-inch square block. But if you don't have 2 rulers, then you can still cut your 9.5 inch square blocks, but this is going to be a situation where you do use the lines that are on your mat. And I know when I was talking about cutting fabric, I said don't use the lines on the mat, but this is a situation where you will want to use the lines on the mat. So for this situation, I'm going to line up my fabric, and so I want it to be lined up with one of those lines, and then also line it up with one of these lines. So this is a right angle. And now looking on the mat, we can see that this mat, it only has 1-inch lines. It doesn't have any 1/2 inch lines. So I'm going to use my ruler and my mat together. So I'll start off by measuring 9.5, and I know it's going to go there, in between these 2 lines. And it doesn't really matter what the numbers say on the mat, like where you are on the mat, as long as you know what 2 lines it's going to go between. So now I'm going to line up my ruler. It's lined up with the fabric, and the 1/2 inch line is lined up with that line. So I know that this is going to be 9.5 inches. I have my 6 inches here, and then 1, 2, 3.5 inches on that side. So now I can cut that. And there's my 9.5 inch block. So whichever cutting method you use, you're going to cut your blocks out of the strip set. And you should be able to get 4 blocks out of each strip set. Now, if you're in a quilt store, you'll see that there are large square rulers, and using one of those, you would be able to measure a 9.5 inch square block. However, if this is your first quilting project and you're still getting into it, there's no need to invest in something like that. If you are totally into quilting and you want to get all the tools, then by all means go get one. But it's not required at this stage of your quilting life if you're just getting started. Those are quite expensive, and that is something that you can work up to. So now that you know both methods, the strip piecing and the cutting the pieces, how will you decide which method you want to use? Well, both of the methods have advantages. Cutting the pieces first and sewing them together, it does help your sewing be more accurate because you're just sewing a short seam. When you're sewing these long seams, it can be difficult to keep your sewing straight. It's so easy to have wobbles in it. And so if you're struggling with sewing a straight line, then having the smaller pieces will help. And also, if you make a big mistake and you have to take out your sewing, taking out a short seam is easier than taking out a large seam. However, if your sewing is accurate and you're ready, then strip piecing like this is a much more efficient way. It's a lot faster to do the sewing and then cut your blocks. So that's why I encourage you, make 4 blocks with the pieces that you cut, 3.5 inches by 9.5 inches, and then make 4 blocks with strip piecing by sewing the strips together. And then when you've decided which one you like better, then use the rest of the strips that you've cut and make identical blocks. So you're going to use all 9 of each of the color strips that you have, and so you're going to end up with a total of 36 blocks. So make your 36 blocks using whichever method you want, and then in the next video I'm going to help you with some troubleshooting in case there's some problems. For more quilting tutorials, patterns, and inspiration, you can check out my website, ebitastudio.com.